Hi there! Come with us on our trip to New Zealand. We made this trip in December 2024. We first flew from Seattle into Dallas, and then we took an overnight flight from Dallas to Auckland. This was a 15-hour flight, so it was quite long, and by the time we landed, it was around 7 a.m. in Auckland. However, our day was just getting started. We went through customs, met up with our driver for the day, and then started the 2-hour drive down to Matamata, New Zealand. Along the way, we stopped and saw some of the most luscious grass I may have ever seen in my entire life. We saw a dog herding some sheep, which just felt so classic. And then we were there on the Hobbiton property. We were so excited to be here and to tour the property. It was just gorgeous and so well set up and beautifully themed. Before we started our tour for the afternoon, we got to have a little Hobbit lunch. And then we met up with a small tour group and a guide from Hobbiton who took us around and showed us all of the Hobbit holes and told us some of the backstories and little details from the filming of the movies, which was so cool. All of the Hobbit holes were so cute and they were so wonderful to see. We even got to take a picture inside one of the little Hobbit homes. And we did get to see Bilbo Baggins' home on Bag End. But the part that was most special to us was getting to tour a fully furnished, fully completed Hobbit home. These were only completed in around September of 2024, so they were still fairly new by the time we got to them. And they were decked out. They had a full-on living room, they had a few bedrooms, a bathroom, and all the little things that you think a hobbit would need. There was a second half of the house which was just as large, and to no surprise, that is where the kitchen and the dining room were. There was a full pantry with the food and drink, as well as a dining room for all the hobbits to sit down and to share a meal. On our way out to finish the tour, we walked past the water house, got some drinks at the Green Dragon Inn, and then we drove back to Auckland for a very well-deserved night's rest. We woke up in Auckland to start our official day one on the trip. Auckland itself is not a huge city. It only has around 1.7 million people, but for a country whose entire population is around 5 million, it's pretty sizable. We took off for our first activity for the day by walking down to the waterfront and the pier area. It was absolutely gorgeous. There were lots of small shops and little restaurants, and it was so clean and so nice, and we had great weather as well. Our walk ended us right next to Auckland's Maritime Museum, and right across from it was the marina, which is where our first excursion of the day was taking place. We were getting to help crew one of the old America's Cup sailing yachts. The America's Cup is a race where a bunch of sailboats from around the world come together and try to sail as fast as they can. Now, this yacht was a very old model and since retired from racing, but it has since been transformed into a fun activity for tourists like ourselves to get involved in. The hired crew on board helped to get us out of the marina, and once we were there, the sails came down and the arm muscles came out. We got to help with the cranks, which brought the sails down and back up, and we had these gorgeous views from the water of Auckland while we were out there. At some point, we turned the boat around and headed back in, and we helped out with that as well. And the whole time, we had fairly considerable speed on the water, and with the new technology that there is today, I can only imagine that the boats go way faster now. The crew on board was absolutely wonderful. They got us back safely into the marina, and it was a wonderful start to the day. After lunch, we decided to explore the city a bit more, and we found this large park in the middle of the city called Albert Park. It was super lush and full of greenery, and at the top of the ridge, they had this really polished fountain area with cut grass, And it was sort of a mixture of a European design with a bit of a tropical feel. It was gorgeous and peaceful, and we got to hang out here for a little bit. Later that evening, we met up with our tour group that would be with us for the rest of the trip. We got dinner together, and then we walked towards the end of one of the piers to watch the sunset and to have an amazing end to our first proper day in New Zealand. Day 2 and our last full day in Auckland started with another orientation walk around the city. We took a bit of a different direction, seeing a lot of landmarks and other old buildings, including the Sky Tower, which is essentially Auckland's version of the Space Needle. After our morning walk, we had a little bit of free time to ourselves, and so our family chose to see the All Blacks experience. Now, the All Blacks are the rugby team for New Zealand, represented by the Silver Fern. And this experience was so cool because we got to learn about the history of the team and the significance it has for the country and the sport. I wasn't able to get a lot of footage inside the experience itself, but at the very end, we had this cool opportunity to try out our skills as rugby players. Whether it was kicking a rugby ball at a target or practicing a throw to one of our teammates, it was super fun and funny to watch all of the attempts. That afternoon, we got back together with our tour group for some island time. We took a short ferry over to the island of Waiheke, just off of Auckland, and we spent the afternoon there, experiencing some of the summer weather, the gorgeous blue water, and the amazing views that the island has to offer. There were dozens of cute little shops, wonderful holiday homes, and the main reason why we headed out to the island was to do some wine tasting. Now, I'm no wine connoisseur myself, but it was just a wonderful experience to sip some wine, and enjoy the scenery around us. In between the stops, we got to dip our toes in the ocean and grab a double scoop of Hokey Pokey ice cream, which is the hallmark ice cream for New Zealand, and it's so good. We went to our second winery and got to taste a few more rosés, reds, and whites, and then we headed back to the mainland. That evening, we spent our last night in Auckland, exploring the city just a bit more. We stopped by Shakespeare Tavern, which is New Zealand's proclaimed first brew pub, and it was really fun to see this old historic building. Our family had dinner together that night, and that's how we ended our last day in Auckland. Day 3, we packed up and left Auckland with our sights set on Rotorua. The drive was about 3 hours away, so we got to make a few stops along the way, and one of the stops that we made turned out to be one of my favorite excursions for the whole trip, and these were the glowworm caves of Waitomo. Wai in the Maori language means water, and Tomo means tomb, so these are essentially tombs of water that were carved many, many years ago, and are now caves for people like us to explore. We got to take this wonderful hike down into the valley with so much lush greenery and different flora. Right before we entered the cave, we encountered some eels, which was a little creepy if I'm being honest, but super cool. From there, we put on our hard hats and headed into the cave. These rock formations were really wonderful to see, and it was so cool getting to walk in right above this little stream. We walked in a bit further, and at one point our guide told us to turn off our flashlights. When we did, above us were a bunch of twinkling little lights, and these were the glowworms. And as we walked deeper, we eventually got to the small little dinghy that we hopped in and floated down that stream a bit further into the cave, and all around us were these glowing little dots. We came back and parked the boat, got out of the cave, and took a quick hot chocolate and tea break before heading to our second cave. Along the way, we stopped and saw a silver fern, which, if you remember, is the emblem for the All Blacks. A long time ago, the silver fern was used as a navigation tool by the Maori people, and they do have this sort of silver color on the underside of the leaves. We kept walking to our second cave, and this one was more of a study of rock formations than anything else. We saw stalactites, stalagmites, all these kind of cool formations that came from the water that carved these caves many years ago. And we did get to see the different tomos along the way, or openings at the very ceiling of the cave where water's flown in. One of the last things that we saw in the cave was the skeleton of a moa bird, which is like this huge ostrich-looking bird that lived a long time ago. Unfortunately, they were hunted into extinction, but their bones say that they were way larger than a human being and just absolutely massive. We left Waitomo and were finishing our drive to Rotorua, but stopped at this bridge along the way, which offered these amazing views of the gorge beneath us. We finally reached Rotorua and got to walk around the city a little bit. We grabbed dinner, and I just had a hankering for mussels, which were so delicious. After dinner, we walked up to the lakefront that had a lovely boardwalk. It was so peaceful. And the lake itself is actually a caldera because the whole area of Rotorua is known for its hot springs. So as you can guess, it did smell a bit like sulfur, but the visuals were absolutely gorgeous. We walked down the main strip to wrap up the night, and I had to get another cup of Hokey Pokey ice cream, and that's how I wrapped up day 3. Day 4 was Christmas Day, so we added some festivities to our day. We set out on our first excursion, and along the way stopped at an active hot spring, and yes, it smelled very much like boiled eggs. Our next stop was to meet our guide for the day, whose name was Tez and is a local in the area. He took us on a bit of a nature walk, describing the flora and fauna local to this area. We learned that the nature of New Zealand was primarily not native and was brought there over the course of many, many years. We walked a bit further, and then Tez showed us some very old carvings into a rock face that described some of the Maori people's history and their lifestyle. This display is now protected, and we were so fortunate to get to see it and take a look. We walked back out of the forest, and we were on to our traditional Maori feast, which is called a hangi. This experience was hosted by a wonderful local family that lived in the area, and they set up feasts like this and other experiences for other people like myself to get to see. A hangi is essentially the Maori version of a barbecue, and we did get to see the process of digging up our hangi lunch. The way that this feast is made is by taking quartz rocks, heating them up to an extreme heat, and then burying them with your food for several hours. That food is covered, and then once it's dug up, it is fully cooked and ready to eat. Looking into this hangi, the team had prepared several types of protein, stuffing, and lots of really tasty vegetables for us to eat that day. The team went and prepared that feast, and then we got to dine on our lunch, accompanied with a little bit of fry bread, which is this just dense, decadent bread that got to go with our meal. We walked off our lunch by going on another nature walk. On this one, we were looking for 5 primary types of trees found in this part of New Zealand. We also learned that ferns are a very diverse and very common plant found here. We learned that they actually don't have any palm trees in New Zealand. They are just really tall ferns. Following our nature walk, we said goodbye to Tez and headed back home for the afternoon in Rotorua. That evening, since it was Christmas, our family opted into a Christmas dinner. And what started as just a festive feast turned into a little bit of partying. Day 5 was a travel day, and we hopped on a plane to head down to Christchurch. We'd be spending the rest of our trip on the southern island, and once we landed in Christchurch, we had the afternoon to explore. It was a super cute town, full of history, but walking around the city, they had tons of cute shops and this adorable indoor market where they had so many amazing food stalls. I think each member of our family went to a different stall, bought some food, and then we ate it together. I did have to get my 3rd cup of hokey pokey for the trip. And then we capped out the night by finding a place to play billiards, which was just an awesome thing to do while you're on a trip with a group. Day 6 was technically another travel day, but it might have been one of my favorites overall. We started out by taking the Transalpine train from Christchurch over to Greymouth. The Transalpine train essentially runs from the east to the west coast of the southern island of New Zealand. You sit in this cabin with these wonderful views out the side, getting to watch the countryside go by. Where we started, the day was pretty cloudy with fairly low visibility, but as we made our way through the mountains and across the terrain, the sun came out and just turned into a gorgeous day. We started to see more mountains, really lush greenery, and just great views of the landscape that was very reminiscent of The Lord of the Rings. We stopped at Arthur's Pass at the midway point, took some pictures, and then completed the train ride and arrived at Greymouth. We took a short lunch break, which included a quick walk to the oceanfront, and the day was just gorgeous. The sun was out, and it was really nice and warm. From there, we got back onto a coach and completed our journey to get to Franz Josef, where we'd be spending the next few days. Franz Josef is a super small town overall, primarily known for outdoor activities like kayaking and a few boat adventures, but it was absolutely gorgeous. There were snow-capped mountains in the background, and after our dinner with our group, we got to walk around a little bit, watching the sunset behind the mountains and closing out the day. Day 7 was our full day in Franz Josef, which we started out with a little morning activity. We loaded up on some kayaks with an adventure group as well as some people from our tour group and did a kayak adventure across Lake Maporika. As we made our way across the lake, Mount Cook was behind us, and it made for some pretty awesome photo opportunities. It was a gorgeous day out there. The sun was out, it was warm, and the scenery was just beautiful. Once we got to the other side of the lake, we docked our boats for a bit and went on a nature walk around a local park. The adventure group that we signed up with talked to us about the anti-predator efforts going on in New Zealand, the different types of plants they have in the area, and lots of interesting stuff generally about the nature in New Zealand. We got to a resting spot, had a mandatory hot chocolate and tea break, and then made our way back across the lake to wrap up the activity. After lunch, our family decided to go to a kiwi preserve. We did get to see a live kiwi. Unfortunately, I was not able to film it, but they are so dang cute. However, I did make out with a cup of hokey pokey as well, so you can watch that. That afternoon, our family caught the shuttle to go to a nearby trailhead and hike some of the popular trails around there. If you're really serious about hiking, you can hike all the way to the Franz Josef Glacier, but we were feeling pretty low-key that afternoon, so we just hit some really gorgeous spots a couple of feet into the trail and had a really nice afternoon just being outside. That evening, we took it pretty easy, got dinner as a family, and wrapped up the day together. Day 8, we were once again on the move with our sights set on Queenstown. We made the most out of this travel day by getting to see several stops along the way. The first of which was Lake Matheson, which was at the end of this very foresty trail. This whole area felt a lot like the Pacific Northwest in the United States, but it was still really special to see this type of scenery with new landmarks and just knowing we were in a different country to enjoy it. Following that, we continued our drive, and our next stop was at the Tauparikaka Marine Reserve, which was this amazing beach, and the contrast here was really cool with the flat ocean on one side and these ominous, super tall trees rising on the other side. We continued our drive, and this may have been one of the most scenic drives we had the whole trip, so I may stop talking here and let you enjoy some of the scenery that we encountered along the way. After around 5 hours of driving, we were finally looking into the valley towards Queenstown and Lake Wakatipu. We got settled into our accommodations for the night. Our family found this cute little ramen shop to have dinner, and afterwards we walked around the lakefront with all the cute shops that they had in the area, saw some street performances, and settled down for a very well-deserved night's rest. Day 9, we packed up and left Queenstown just for the night so we could make our way to the Milford Sound. The Milford Sound, or Piopiotahi, is one of many sounds in the Fiordland National Park on the southwestern coast of New Zealand. These fjords were carved by glaciers a long time ago and now leave these epic views to go see and explore. As always, along the way, we made several stops and got to see a few fun things like a bird in its nest as well as another eel. And as we got closer to the sound, the mountains got a bit taller, and we started seeing some really cool waterfalls, little clusters of snow at the tops of the mountains. One of the really cool things that we saw was Homer Tunnel. This tunnel was carved by hand back in the 1900s, and it's pretty much stayed in the same shape ever since, with minimal innovation and upkeep. It is a one-way road, so it was super skinny getting through, and cars on the other side had to wait their turn. Finally, we reached the Sound, and it was yet another glorious day. I feel like I keep mentioning this, but even though it was summer in New Zealand, they still tend to have a lot of rainy days, so just the fact that we got to experience so many sunny ones just felt like a huge blessing for our whole trip. We boarded the boat along with several other passengers, got our welcome meeting, and then settled in to our room for the night on the boat itself. Shortly after, the boat took off and took us through a portion of the Sound. We got to see these epic mountains rising on either side of us that were carved by those glaciers so long ago. We also got to see some seals hanging out on the rocks. And if waterfalls are more your thing, we got to see those as well. One of the waterfalls, we got super close, and they actually dipped the front of the boat into the water of the waterfall because they said if you got splashed by the water, you would look 10 years younger. Eventually, the crew parked the boat for the night, and then we had our option for an afternoon activity. You could either go kayaking or hop in their tender or little dinghy to go out for the day. We'd already been kayaking this trip, so chose the tender and felt like this was the right option because we got a local nature expert on the boat with us, taking us around, talking about different interesting things about the fjords and the Sound itself. And we got some really cool views on the water as well. After that activity was over, we had the opportunity to jump in the Sound and take a little swim. It was pretty cold, about 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the water, but definitely worth it to say that we swam in the Milford Sound. As the sun started to set, we were able to get these 360-degree views of these just wonderful mountains all around us, with this one glacier sticking up in the background as well. We had some dinner with the other passengers, played some games on board, and that's how we ended our night. The next morning, we woke up to the most wonderful surprise of seeing dolphins right next to our boat. We were on our way out of the sound towards the open ocean for the morning, and we were told that seeing dolphins was possible, but it was still a wonderful treat to get to see them. We got out of the sound into the Pacific, and while the water was pretty calm, it was super windy standing out there, so I didn't take my camera out for too long. The boat turned around, and we made our way back to the harbor, seeing some more seals along the way. We got off the boat and headed back towards Queenstown, and on the way, we encountered a kea bird. These birds are so smart. They have the intellect of your average 5-year-old, and they will do pretty much anything for a bit of food. They have a phrase here called "don't feed the kea," and we were sure not to do that. They're a huge bird, so clever, and it was really cool to get to see one. On the way back to Queenstown, we stopped by this field to see the lupin flowers in full bloom. There are these gorgeous flowers that make a feature in the Lord of the Rings movies, and they were just so glorious on the sunny day. Back in Queenstown that afternoon, we set out with our tour group to have our last group meal of the trip, which was bittersweet. We got to walk back through the main strip of Queenstown with all their fun shops. We ate dinner together, and following that, we all had tickets to go up the gondola at the edge of town. This gondola pretty much goes straight up one of the cliff sides near the town, and from the top, you just get this amazing view of the lake, of Queenstown, and everything else in the area. After we got down from the gondola, our family went to Cookie Bar, which is a popular chain in New Zealand, and they sell these warm cookies straight out of the oven, and our family had to try one of each flavor. This day was New Year's Eve, so we were committed to staying awake until midnight. We saw the sunset, found a spot on the beach after dark, and then watched the fireworks to bring in the new year. The next day, our family had an afternoon excursion, and walking there, we saw this man whose dog sings with him, which was so funny. Our excursion for the day was hopping on the TSS Earnshaw, which is a steamboat that still runs to this day. You could look below the deck and see where people were still shoveling in coal to power the steamboat and propel it forward. We had yet another wonderful day out on the water, and once we got to our destination, we got off the boat and had a wonderful beachside lunch. Following that, we had a quick show of a farmer on the property showing us how to shear a sheep, which was super interesting and something that none of us had ever seen before. The farmhand also showed us one of his herding dogs. Her name was Echo, and she gave us a demonstration of herding up a group of sheep and putting them into the paddock. Since it was our last night on the trip, our family decided to go back up the gondola and eat at the restaurant at the top to watch the last sunset and to spend our last night together. We finished off the day by taking a polar plunge in the lake and welcoming in the new year. Day 12, it was finally time to go home. We first flew from Queenstown to Auckland to LAX, where we got to see more dolphins, which rounded out our trip, and then arrived in Seattle later that evening. It was a wonderful trip. I would recommend it to anybody who wants to visit New Zealand. And thanks for joining me on this adventure.